So, a BBC article dropped yesterday detailing the dramatic rise in anti Semitic incidents. The article said this: reports of anti Semitic incidents in the US have reached a record high since last year's Hamas attack in Israel, according to a preliminary report from the Anti Defamation League Center for Extremism, also known as ADL. The group found more than 10,000 incidents from the 7th of October 2023 to the 24th of September of this year, more than a 200% increase compared to the same period a year earlier. It is the highest ever since the ADL began tracking such incidents in 1979. The more than 10,000 episodes of anti-Semitism reported by the ADL included roughly 8,015 incidents of verbal or written harassment, 1,840 incidents of vandalism, and 150 incidents of physical assault. The ADL said that it expected its preliminary numbers to increase as it receives more data. The final report for 2024 will be published in the spring of 2025. So these look like really shocking numbers, a real surge in racist attacks, and I'm not surprised that anti-Semitic incidents have risen since the 7th of October. It's going to happen, right? Despite the facts that Israel are on the wrong side of history, there will be people blaming the plight of the Palestinians on Jewish people. We've seen big right-wing personalities jump on the pro-Palestine bandwagon. I don't think they care about Palestine. People such as Jackson Hinkle, Candace Owens, some have only done it, if I'm honest, because of their hatred of Jewish people. We've seen synagogues attacked as if they're the ones committing the genocide. No, it's the state of Israel. However, and it's a big however, in this article, in fact, the very next paragraph, it recontextualizes the entire piece. Part of the overall increase comes from a change in methodology to include expressions of opposition to Zionism, as well as support for resistance against Israel or Zionists that could be perceived as supporting terrorism, the ADL said. Okay. So the rise in anti-Semitic incidents have just been called into question because the ADL decided that any opposition to Israel or Zionism could now be seen as anti-Semitic. And it's funny how that paragraph is buried halfway through the article. Now, as I said, I'm very confident that anti-Semitic incidents have risen, just how Islamophobic incidents have risen since the 7th of October 2023. But we now have no idea how much of this is legitimate anti-Semitism and how much is simply showing solidarity with Palestine. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I reckon a significant portion, maybe even most of it. We've seen the weaponization of anti-Semitism for almost a decade now, and that's not when it began, but it certainly ramped up, especially when a certain person was leader of the Labour Party. Since last October, we have had extreme pro-Israel and Zionist figures gaslight everyone into being called anti-Semitic when we simply want the genocide to end. The ADL's preliminary report tallied more than 8,000 of incidents that took place during anti-Israel rallies, which featured regular, explicit expressions of support for terrorist groups, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Even the BBC is framing this as anti-Israel marches. These are not anti-Israel marches, they are ceasefire marches. Now, I don't know, most people at those marches, are they anti-Israel? Yeah, probably, which isn't a bad thing. I'm anti-Israel. But for the BBC to be, one, impartial and two, objective, you need to call the marches for what they are and what they intend to do, which is to try and pressure the government to stop its complicity. I also do not take the so-called support for terrorist groups line seriously. I mean, neither should you, because nearly all Zionists, pro-Israel extremists, right-wing pundits have called anyone who is sympathetic with Palestine terrorists. I mean, we've had the same people accuse every single person who attended those marches as Hamas supporters. So it's a load of bullshit. It's also, I think, incredibly anti-Semitic. One of the IHRA definitions of anti-Semitism is conflating the state of Israel with Jewish people. Who is the number one group that does this the most? That's right, Zionists. They have framed this entire thing as being a defense for Jewish people, that Israel must be defended because it is the homeland for Jews, and when anyone attacks Israel, they see it as an attack on Jews, which it is not. The ADL have also done the same thing by including opposition to Israel and Zionism in the definition of anti-Semitism. That in of itself is anti-Semitic. Now, two examples I've seen in the last couple of days using anti-Semitism as an argument when it's simply attacking Israel. One of them is Eyal Yacobi. He's featured on CNN and Fox News. He decided to defame journalist Mehdi Hassan, someone who I have a a lot of respect for. So this is Mehdi Hassan talking about bin Laden using Israel as an inspiration for 9/11 on Twitter. Never forget that it was the destruction of Beirut by Israel in 1982 that bin Laden would later claim inspired his attack on the Twin Towers in 2001. There is such thing as blowback, and yes, violence begets violence. Terror produces more terror. Jacobi responded, Mehdi Hassan is now actively blaming the Jews for 9/11. This guy is so bent on demonizing Jews that he is now taking bin Laden at his word, presenting as though bin Laden had a justifiable reason to carry out 9/11. Now, not once did Mehdi mention Jewish people. He said Israel. He also didn't say that it was justifiable. He said that, this was bin Laden's reasoning. So Jacobi decided to lie. He decided to lie about Mehdi blaming Jews and also lie that he thought bin Laden was justified. That's how the tweet reads anyway. Now, he wasn't the only one. So many have accused Mehdi Hassan of anti-Semitism. Now, even if we were to say what Mehdi said was a load of rubbish, the point Mehdi was making is that Israel, in its entire history, has been a violent, murderous endeavor. And if people look toward Israel as inspiration, that means, as he said, violence begets violence. And Netanyahu did actually say that 9/11 was good for Israel. Another example is this article by Howard Jacobson in The Observer, and it is one of the most disgusting things I have ever seen. Tales of infanticide have stoked hatred of Jews for centuries. They echo still today. A year after the 7th of October attack, the myth of blood libel persists in the media coverage of Gaza violence. Now, I'm not going to go through the article because it was covered on last night's Normal Island show, and if you missed it, please go watch it. But this is essentially saying that because people are pointing out the crimes of Israel, it's in fact blood libel, which is an old anti-Semitic myth. It's absolutely disgusting. He is trying to silence the very real reality of children, babies, being murdered by the Israeli state. I want to go back to the ADL. Who exactly are they? Well, I found this article calling them out. The Anti-Defamation League is not what it seems. Under the guise of fighting hate speech, the ADL has a long history of wielding its moral authority to attack Arabs, blacks, and queers. Representative Ilhan Omar was attacked in March for invoking the anti-Semitic trope of dual loyalty in her criticisms of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. The Anti-Defamation League ADL, a Jewish non-governmental organization based in the United States, whose stated mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all, was among the first to call on congressional leaders to take immediate action against her. Now, I'm sure you know what AIPAC is, but if you don't, it's a pro-Israel lobby group in the US. It's incredibly powerful, and so many politicians, both Republicans and Democrat, take money from them. Ilhan Omar is one of the few left-wing Democrats who rightly pointed out the issue of AIPAC. It wants to advance the interests of Israel, despite it largely being in the US. She was attacked for doing the dual loyalty trope, which she didn't do. She was pointing out foreign money being funneled into the US political system. The ADL, as we just read, was one of the first to go after her. The ADL, in addition to its stated mission of shoring up US support for Israel, is deeply loyal to the US state. The second is that the ADL has waged a long, vigorous, and successful campaign alongside AIPAC, specifically to characterize Arab American political organizing as dual loyalty. So they attacked Ilhan Omar for supposedly engaging in the dual loyalty for Jewish people trope, yet they've been pushing the same narrative about American Arabs. The bigger thing here, though, is its mission for the US to be pro-Israel, and they have worked with AIPAC. So they have a direct motive for trying to shore up support for Israel. So if you connect the dots, that is why the ADL are including opposition to Zionism and Israel as anti-Semitic. They are not concerned, or at least primarily concerned, with anti-Semitism, but with supporting Israel. Consider me shocked. Now, I do want to stress, anti-Semitism is incredibly real. Yes, it's on the rise, and it's our job on the left to call it out when we see it. But when it's organisations that exist to advance the interests of another state, hiding behind its concern for anti-Jewish hate, then that clearly makes Jewish people feel even more in danger. And it's why I often say that Zionism and the support for a settler, colonial, ethnic nationalist states is itself anti-Semitic. Now, turn left has really grown in the last couple of years, especially this year. It started out with just me. I was on an iPhone and broken laptop filming in my front room. And I always said at the beginning, I want this to be a media organization. I don't want it to just be me. That's why it's not called The Curtis Daily Show. It's called Turn Left. And the plan was to have multiple contributors. And I'm so glad to say that we do have that. There's now 5 of us. We all host normal island shows. We make social media videos, and we're going to start doing more ambitious content with the rest of the team. But I'm so glad that it's not just me, but in fact, there's 5 of us. But we are all still completely voluntary. The amount of income we get from Turn Left, I mean, I'm going to be transparent with you. I mean, you can look up most of it yourself anyway, but it's good to be transparent. Our Patreon gets about £118 a month. Our Ko-Fi account gets £25 a month. And then the YouTube ad revenue, that's about £200 to £250 a month. So we are looking at maybe just over £400 a month. None of that goes into our pockets. That goes to things such as equipment. We recently bought some microphones for the rest of the team. It went to that. Our streaming software to do our live shows, that costs money. And it doesn't make sense for us to take any money out when we want to have a sort of pot of money that can go on, whether we do interviews, whether we have to travel across the country. We know how expensive the railways are. But in order for us to grow, in order for us to become full-time, so we can do this as our full-time jobs, then yes, it does need money. So if you can help us in any way, it's really appreciated. There's a few ways you can do it. You can like this video, you can share it, you can follow us on all of our social media accounts, especially Twitter. You can subscribe to us and tell your friends and family about Turn Left. And finally, if you can, and only if you can support us financially. You can do that by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can choose to either support us on Patreon or Ko-Fi. The links are all there. You get the option to do monthly or one-off payments. All of that is incredibly helpful. And one day we can become a fully fledged socialist media organisation. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.